Hello and welcome to Byte Basics. I'm Earl Yeager. On Byte Basics, we cover all of those topics that people tend to always assume you already know about computers, whether it's backups, how the computer organizes its data, or like today we're going to cover viruses and malware. So what are viruses and malware? Well, malware are those things that are bad software, bad programs on your computer. And we're talking about things like viruses, worms, Trojans. We'll go over all of these different things and explain a little bit about what they are. But first, let's talk a little bit about why people do these things. So the first few reasons are financial gain. People can make money from you making mistakes with viruses, so they can collect your personal information. They can get you to put in and buy things that you wouldn't otherwise buy. There's a lot of different ways in which they can get financial gain. They can sell your personal information. So that's one of the reasons why people do malware. They can get access to your computer's resources. Some people use your computer's processor and RAM and hard drive space for their own ends remotely, and that's another reason why people use malware. Another thing they do is access your data. So we were talking just a moment about them getting your personal information, so social security numbers, identity theft. That's one of the reasons why people create malware. Access to other computers. Your computer may not be their goal. They may be just using your computer as a stepping stone to get where they're wanting to go. So that's another reason. And then some people just want to do it for malicious purposes, much like things like tagging and things are done for no particular gain. Sometimes people do malware for no particular gain, just for the malicious purpose of doing it. So we're going to go through the different kinds of malware that are out there and then talk a little bit about some of the things you can do to protect yourself against them. So when we're talking about malware, again, as I mentioned, we're talking about things like viruses, Trojans, and worms. So when we're looking at these things, they're classified in two different ways. Primarily, the most common way is to classify it by the way it infects your computer, or its propagation method. But it can also be classified by what it does when it gets there, or the payload, or what's contained within the virus. So those are the two main ways to classify them. We're going to look at it both ways on viruses here. So the first thing is a virus, which is a program or piece of software or some code that's attached to a legitimate program. So it's something you're already using. Maybe it's attached to a file that you're already using. Maybe it's you've got a file from a student that you're opening. Whatever it is, it's real data. It's something that you really want to get access to. But when you open it, it contains a virus as well, and then that virus spreads within your computer. So viruses are things that are primarily contained within your computer itself, and then from there can get spread to other computers by moving data. So you copy a file or you send someone an email with a file that's attached. That file may contain the virus. When they open it, their computer gets infected as well. And sometimes we move them around via flash drive or via these external hard drives. So there's a lot of tools which might move viruses around. And so that's one of the main sources of infections that people see. And the next one is called a worm. And a computer worm is a kind of virus-like program, a malware program that propagates on its own. You don't have to do anything. It can move itself from computer to computer across a network. So it has its own methods of getting from one computer to the next computer to the next computer. And these are really dangerous for large networks of computers like our district. So those are some of the things that we tend to look out for. And it doesn't require any interaction on your part. You may or may not be doing anything to get the worm started. It may just infect your computer and move on along. And so we have to have software to protect against things like that. And in the district we do. But we'll go over some of those examples here in a moment. So those are worms. They move on their own from computer to computer. And then the final type of program is malware is something called a Trojan. Now, a Trojan is malware that pretends to be something other than what it is. So it pretends to be that song that you wanted to download or that movie you were trying to download. Often, especially with students, we see them using what's called peer-to-peer file sharing software. There's things like LimeWire and BitTorrent and a whole slew of these out there that students are using to trade music and movies and things, sometimes legally, sometimes not. But when they're doing this, often some of the files they get seem to be quote-unquote bad files. They download a movie and it doesn't open, or they download a song and it doesn't run. And the reason why is it was never a movie or a song to begin with. They just named it that, and it's actually malware. It's actually a bad piece of software that's going to do something harmful to your computer. So those are the three main types of propagation. Viruses, which are legitimate software, things that you intended to download, or legitimate data, files that you really wanted, that when you open, they're actually infected. Or worms, which are things that move on their own from computer to computer. Or Trojans, things that are masquerading as something else. And once you download them and use them, they infect your computer. Okay? Now we're going to look at them from what they do to your computer, why these things are put on and what the end results are. So we're going to look at some of those options here. So the first few things here that are malware by what they call payload, by what it's trying to achieve, is the first is a backdoor, which is leaving an entrance for someone else to get into your computer. So if they wanted a way to get back into your computer again later for whatever purposes they have, they'll first put a program on your computer that's a backdoor that would then let them in to put other things on your computer or access your data or access your files or whatever that may be. Another thing is called a botnet or a zombie. That's software that once put on your computer, this malware then takes over your computer, often when you're not even using it, when it's just sitting there doing nothing or appearing to do nothing. This software is running in the background, achieving whatever goal the creator of that malware wanted. Maybe they're using it to send spam. Maybe they're using it to help crack a password. So they're having hundreds of these computers out there that they've taken over as zombies or as a botnet that they're using to do some particular goal like crack a password. The next one is a sniffer. What this is a piece of software that's sitting on your computer that's watching the computer's network, the network that the computer's on, paying attention to every piece of data that gets sent across this network, trying to catch useful tidbits such as passwords and usernames or financial data or anything else that might be coming across that happens to not be encrypted. So those are things that people might be doing. Other things that are on here are things like a keylogger. And what a keylogger is, it's a piece of software, or at times it can even be a piece of hardware that records everything you type into the keyboard, including usernames and passwords, which is primarily what they're after, but also at times things like social security numbers or anything else you might be filling out on web pages. So if you've downloaded software that contains a keylogger, that's what they're after. That's what they're going for. Rootkits. Rootkits are pieces of software that give administrative rights to the person who created this virus. And what that allows them to do is have even deeper levels of control on your computer. So they can do things like turn off your antivirus or your firewall. So they're pretty malicious pieces of software. So rootkits are one of the more dangerous things out there. There's also spyware. Spyware is things that just record things that you're doing on the web browser primarily, and also trying to catch your personal information and your browsing habits, things you go to, things you're buying. Also, if you're typing in any financial information like credit card numbers and things into websites, spyware tries to catch that kind of stuff, as well as usernames and passwords. Almost everything is targeted at picking up usernames and passwords. Okay, and then the final thing that we're going to look at here is something called browser hijackers. And browser hijackers are things that affect your computer's browser and cause pop-ups or what they call pop-unders, so that when you close your web browser, there's an advertisement hiding behind it. That's a pop-under. Or if they're coming up in front of you when you're browsing and you keep seeing them pop up on the screen, those are your pop-up ads. And those pop-up ads that keep coming up on the screen are a type of browser hijacker. Another common thing that browser hijackers do is they take over your home page, so that when you open up your computer, you're going to a page, your web browser, you're going to a page other than the one you intended. So if you're normally at the EPISD homepage, but you now open up and you find you're on some advertisement page or some other company's page, that's an example of a browser hijacker, and that's a type of malware. Now, some of these are really malicious and trying to do you real harm, and some of these are just inconvenient. Like a browser hijacker is often just really inconvenient. And spam is kind of an example of some of this that's just usually inconvenient. So you get all ranges of malware from things that are detrimental and harmful to your computer to things that are just kind of an annoyance. The last thing I want to mention here talking about malware is phishing attacks. And a phishing attack is not technically malware in and of itself. It's a way in which people who create malware or people who just want to get your information found other ways to exploit the internet and individuals in particular. So what they do is they create a page or a message or an email that looks like a legitimate contact or a legitimate message from a company or from your computer itself in order to try to get you to do an action. And that action might be to send an email, or that action might be to log into a particular website or to download a piece of software. And this phishing attack looks legitimate for all intents and purposes. It tries to appear to be an official email from that correspondence or officially their web page, but there are little things about it that tip you off that it's not legitimate or real. And so on Digital Discoveries here in the studio, there's been a show already talking a little bit about phishing attacks, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more here as well. Okay, so phishing attacks, here's an example of an email that is a phishing attack. And when we look at this email, it's from a help desk, but when we look at the address that it's coming from, the email address is not related to anything related to the school district. And so this is a big tip-off when you see something that's like help desk or something like that, but the email address is not a district email address or not legitimately from that company. So if AOL is contacting you or eBay is contacting you or whomever the email comes from, your bank, whatever, if they're contacting you but the email is not from their company, the at and what follows after the at is not just their normal corresponding address, it's likely that this is a phishing attack. Another thing that you can look at is phishing attacks usually contain incorrect bits of information. So if you know a little something about the network you're on, like for example, this particular email has something about a storage quota that happens to be an incorrect number. If you know what those amounts are, that's one way to tip off. But if you read through the email, you may find things like references to people that you don't know, or references to people that don't really exist, or all kinds of things that might tip off that this isn't really a legitimate email. So there's other things that are often hiding in there. And finally, they're usually soliciting types of information that most professional businesses don't solicit. So if they're asking you to send them your username and password, or they're asking you to send your social security number to them, in all likelihood, it is not that organization. Most organizations do not ask for your personal information to be sent to them. And most of them actually don't even contact you directly if there's anything going on as far as by email. They normally do it by phone or other methods if there's a problem, or they rely upon you to contact them. So if there's someone asking over email for your username and password, or if there's a website that says it needs your username and password to some other website, in all likelihood that's a phishing attack. It's an attack trying to get your information. Also, you'll notice on the URLs for different websites, sometimes it'll have a URL and it won't be an EPISD URL. So in the district, sometimes you'll click on a message that appears to come from district people, but when it opens, it's not a district web page. If it doesn't have episd.org as one of the parts of the web address, it's not coming from the district, and that's another tip-off that this is a malware attack or a phishing attack in this particular instance. So there's a lot of different ways these people go about trying to hook you into getting their malware code. So let's talk a little bit about ways you can protect against malware. So some of the things you can get is antivirus software. And all of the district computers thankfully have antivirus software included. So our district uses antivirus software, but I highly recommend, if you don't already have antivirus software, that you get antivirus software for your home computer. So any home computers you have should have antivirus software on them, and all of them need it. There are several free providers of antivirus software. You don't necessarily have to pay for it. Different companies offer different solutions, so I would look out there for different varieties of antivirus software and read reviews. There's a lot of good reviews on a lot of different websites. You can do some searches on what's the best free antivirus software or what's the best paid antivirus software, and you'll get a lot of good recommendations. And again, don't only look at one particular website, check several, and also check websites you know and recognize, like Consumer Reports or pages like that, or from magazines that you recognize, like there's different computer magazines that if you recognize the name of the magazine, that would be a legitimate website with legitimate reviews, as opposed to a hacker website fishing for you to get their fake antivirus software. Another thing that you should have on your computer to help protect against some of these different kinds of attacks is something called a firewall. And a firewall helps protect against some of the things like worms that move from computer to computer. So this is something that helps against networking attacks on your computer. And firewalls are there to make sure only the legitimate kinds of communication are happening to your computer, and not communication that you don't want to occur. And so you want to make sure that your computer has a firewall on it. All of our district computers have the Windows firewall already turned on and available, but your home computer, that can get turned off. And sometimes for different games or for different tools you might be using at home, it's easy to just turn off the firewall to get it to work, rather than going through the steps to make the appropriate passage through the firewall by setting up the right rules in the firewall. It's worth the time and effort to take to do a little bit of research to find out how to change your firewall to allow your game to work, rather than just turning it off. So if you have a firewall at home, either on your computer or on your home router, I don't recommend turning that firewall off. Look at the instructions that come with your router or with your computer, or look up online how to add rules to your firewall to let that game work or let that program work. If you can't get Skype to work at home and you need some help, or if you can't get some other program, something like that, that's going to be something where you want to get the appropriate rules set up in your firewall, because if it's not, you may be allowing more than just your game to function. Okay? Other kinds of things you can do to protect yourself. There's a few other things. You can want to make sure that every hyperlink or every link that's on a page or web address looks legitimate. And so you can just hover over them, and in the very bottom of your browser, you'll see that link show up. So let me give you an example of that. I'll bring something up here on my computer real quick so we can look at that. So let me open up a web page here. So when you're looking at a web page, if you open up a link of any kind, down on the very bottom, hopefully this opens up here shortly, down on the very bottom you'll have an address. Just go to a website here, episd.org. And usually down here at the bottom, on the lower left-hand side, down here, you'll have something that shows you what that email address is, or what that web link is, before you click on it, just as you're hovering over it. So I'm going to bring up our district web page here. And on our district web page, we of course have a lot of different links on things. But as I hover over any of these links, you'll notice down in the lower left, if you keep watching down over on this area of your screen here in the lower left, if you keep watching that, as I hover over any of the links for like district info and go to our schools, you'll see that it says episd.org/schools. If you're hovering over a link in an email or a link in the on a web page or something, and it does not look like it's coming from the company that you think it should. So if it's coming from EPISD and it's not an EPISD address in that link or in that email, I wouldn't click on it. It's in all likelihood some form of a phishing attack or some form of a virus attempt to get you to download something that you shouldn't. Also, if you are going to a bank page or something like that, and these things don't look like they actually come from that company, that's another tip-off that in all likelihood it's not legitimate, and so you shouldn't click on them in that case. Okay? So other kinds of malicious software that protection you can do for malicious software is, as I mentioned a moment ago, most official sources do not solicit your personal information directly, especially unasked for. So if you get something coming from eBay or something coming from a bank or something like that asking you for your personal information, it's probably not legitimate. They don't normally ask you that unasked for. So I would not give that to them. Also be careful of foreign data sources, and what I mean by this is flash drive, external hard drives, those kinds of things. Many of those can have viruses on them. So if you're plugging in a student's flash drive, you should do a virus scan on it. And if you're not certain how, that's something we can cover here in another episode. But if you're not certain how to scan external data sources, we'll go over that. But if you plug them in without scanning them, if you plug them in without looking at them, you could be getting a virus that's coming from some student's home computer. So you want to make sure that whatever data sources you're plugging into your computer are safe before you start copying files off of them. Okay? Other things that you can do to protect yourself against malware is you want to make sure to keep your computer up to date. Windows updates, as well as updates for different software, helps protect against security risks. So most of these Windows updates are some of the things that help protect against things like worms. Worms use what are called known vulnerabilities, things that people have found out will work to get into your computer. And Windows, as well as many other companies, put out regular updates to protect against those things. So if you're not doing the security updates, you're leaving those potential openings open for someone to exploit or take advantage of. You should also be wary of peer-to-peer software. Things like LimeWire and BitTorrent, a lot of those programs are riddled with examples of malware. And so if you download things without being cautious, you could very, very easily infect your computer with malware depending upon what you download. Though, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, that song that doesn't open or that movie that doesn't play, those things might actually be a malware program and never meant to be the movie or the song that you downloaded, and not just a bad file. So you want to make sure that anything that you're downloading is legitimate before you download it. Make sure you have some level of confidence in it before you download it. Okay? Another thing that you can do to protect yourself against malware is if you're not certain about something, if you have an email message, or if there's software that you are considering downloading, or if you're considering logging into a particular website, and you're not certain if it's safe or not, ask someone else that you may think might know, or Google it and find out what's going on with that particular thing. It's always a better idea to check to see if something's legitimate, or to see if there is a fake out there. Ask Google or ask a friend you know about, hey, is this email something that I should be opening? Is this particular website safe to log into, or is this potentially a virus or malware? And if you search for the name of a company with malware, or if you search for the name of a particular email message with malware as part of the search term in Google or other search engines, you often can come up with any examples of known types of attacks for that particular message or phishing attack or whatever it may be. So if it is legitimate, you should find out either by finding nothing about it, or by finding that people are saying it's okay, or people are saying that it's all right. Or on the other hand, if you find examples of people saying this is not safe, don't do it, that's a good hint, good indicator that it's going to be malware, and you don't want to continue with that action. So those are my tips for you regarding malware. Hopefully that's something useful to you, and thank you again for joining us on Byte Basics.